78 times. That is not a number you hear in a standard homicide investigation. That is not a crime of passion, and it is not a fight gone wrong. That is the systematic erasure of a human being. It takes a terrifying amount of physical energy to stab someone 78 times, but it takes an even darker psychological void to stand over them, watch the light leave their eyes, and feel absolutely nothing. To understand the horror that unfolded in Newcastle, we have to look into the fractured mind of Tyrone Thompson. At 22 years old, Thompson was a walking collision of trauma and narcissism. He carried the scars of a violent childhood, a schizophrenic father, abuse by authority figures, and a life steeped in domestic chaos. But trauma explains behavior. It does not excuse evil. Forensic psychiatrists would later peel back the layers of Thompson's psyche, revealing a man suffering from complex PTSD and a severe personality disorder. He harbored bizarre, paranoid delusions. He believed microplastics were poisoning him, turning him into a woman. He believed a shadow government run by the Kardashians was controlling his life. To the untrained eye, these sound like the ramblings of a man who has lost touch with reality. But here is the terrifying truth that detectives uncovered. Thompson was not psychotic when he picked up the knife. He knew exactly where he was. He knew exactly who he was looking at. And he knew exactly what he wanted to do. His motive wasn't born from insanity. It was born from an obsessive, malignant need for control. When he later told police, it took as many times to stab her until she stopped, he revealed the core of his psychology. He didn't just want to hurt Mackenzie Anderson. He wanted to possess her existence entirely. This was the ultimate act of a narcissist who decided that if he couldn't control her life, he would simply take it. Before she became a case file or a headline about domestic violence failures, Mackenzie Anderson was Max. She was 21 years old, vibrant, and the kind of person who seemed to vibrate at a higher frequency than everyone else. Her friends described her as the beating heart of every room. She was the girl dancing until sunrise, the one chasing sunsets along the Newcastle coastline, documenting a life that felt limitless across social media. But the most important title she ever held was mother. Mackenzie had a 1-year-old son she called her love bug and her caterpillar. To understand the magnitude of this tragedy, you have to understand the battle she was fighting for him. Since she was 16, Mackenzie had been at war with methamphetamine addiction. It is a demon that swallows people whole, but when her son was born, Mackenzie fought back. She was actively turning her life around, building a stable home, and clawing her way out of the darkness for the sake of her child. She was winning. She was hopeful. But in late 2019, the darkness found a new way in, wearing the face of Tyrone Thompson. Initially, he seemed like a kindred spirit, someone who understood her scars. But soon, the vibrant young mother began to fade. Her friends noticed the bruises she tried to hide in photos. They saw the spark in her eyes replaced by a constant, low-level terror. Mackenzie wasn't naive. She knew exactly what was happening to her. She began reaching out to domestic violence services, begging for security doors and cameras. She confided in her closest friends with a chilling, prophetic clarity. She didn't say she was afraid he might hurt her. She told them, with absolute certainty, that Tyrone Thompson was going to kill her. She was grieving her own death before it even happened. To investigate a murder, you usually start with the body. But in the case of Mackenzie Anderson, the investigation of her death begins months before the first blow was struck. It begins with a catastrophic failure of the very system designed to protect her. In October 2021, Thompson was finally behind bars, sentenced to 10 months for assaulting and intimidating Mackenzie. It should have been a period of safety, but the justice system, in a move that defies logic, reduced his non-parole period on appeal. Instead of safety, Mackenzie was given a countdown. On March 9th, 2022, Tyrone Thompson walked out of prison. He had served just 4 months. And this is where the system's negligence turns criminal. Rehabilitation is a nice concept, but Thompson hadn't been rehabilitated. He had been festering. He spent his time in that cell obsessing over Mackenzie, nurturing a twisted sense of ownership. The moment he stepped back into society, the hunt began. Within hours of his release, on the very same day, he violated his parole. He breached the apprehended violence order, the piece of paper that was supposed to be a shield. He called her. He told her he was coming. This wasn't a slip-up, it was a declaration of war. And the police? The courts? They missed the signs. The very next day, Thompson assaulted his own father. He was dangerous, volatile, and clearly spiraling. Yet, he was granted conditional bail. As investigators looked back at the timeline leading up to the murder, they found a trail of red flags that were ignored. In the short days following his release, Thompson breached his AVO 8 separate times. 8 times he proved he had no respect for the law. 8 times the system had the justification to lock him away and save Mackenzie's life. And 8 times, he was left free to tighten the noose around his victim. He was stalking her, creating fake social media accounts, and closing in, while the authorities watched from the sidelines. March 25th, 2022, began like any other Friday, but as the sun set over Newcastle, the air inside Mackenzie's Crebert Street unit grew thick with an unspoken threat. Mackenzie, Thompson, and a male friend were gathered together, drinking and socializing. To an outsider, it might have looked like a reconciliation or just a messy post-breakup hanging out. But in the world of domestic violence, this is known as the tension-building phase. It is the calm before the violence, where the abuser tests boundaries and the victim walks on eggshells, terrified that one wrong move will shatter the fragile peace. After consuming just 2 drinks, the monster began to claw its way to the surface. Thompson's demeanor shifted instantly. The charm evaporated, replaced by a volatile, emotional aggression. He began berating Mackenzie, telling her she didn't appreciate him, twisting reality to make himself the victim. This is a classic manipulation tactic, guilt-tripping the target to keep them off balance. Mackenzie felt the shift. She knew the pattern. In a moment of sheer terror masked as casual texting, she sent a message to her male friend sitting right there in the room. "Don't leave me alone with him." She knew that without a witness, she was defenseless. Then, Thompson stopped using words and started using props. He walked into the kitchen and began moving knives around. He wasn't hiding them, he was displaying them. He pulled a large blade from the drawer and placed it on the counter, a silent, terrifying promise of what was to come. It was psychological warfare. He was showing her exactly how this night could end. Around 9:30 p.m., the friend managed to convince Thompson to leave, walking him to the train station to ensure he was gone. But predators don't leave when they are hungry. Thompson doubled back. He scaled a ladder to the second-floor balcony and broke into her sanctuary while she slept. When Mackenzie woke up, he was standing over her in the dark. The night. At 10:40 p.m., the situation escalated from harassment to an active emergency. Mackenzie realized that Thompson wasn't just lurking, he was hunting. In a moment of absolute desperation, she dialed 000. This recording is not just a piece of evidence. It is the harrowing sound of a woman trying to save her own life while following every rule society gave her. Her voice on that tape is hauntingly clear. She didn't scream. She didn't panic. She reported facts with the precision of someone who had been analyzing her own safety for months. "My ex-boyfriend's broken in," she told the operator. "I've woken up to him in my house. I have an AVO on him. He came at me with a knife." Listen to what she is saying. She is ticking every legal box. She is establishing the breach of the protection order. She is establishing the immediate threat to life. But then, she shared a detail that freezes the blood of anyone who hears it. A detail that proves she was acutely aware of the mechanics of the violence about to be inflicted upon her. She told the operator, "He may have a knife still because there was 2 that he had out, and only one of them is here." She had counted the knives. Even in her terror, she was calculating the variables of her own murder. She knew exactly what weapon was missing from her kitchen. While the operator took the information, a final text message left Mackenzie's phone at 10:48 p.m., sent to the friend who had tried to help earlier. It was the last communication she would ever make. The police were on their way. The system was finally responding. But the timeline of a response car cannot compete with the speed of a man determined to kill. Mackenzie Anderson had followed every protocol, but she was trapped in an apartment with a predator who had stopped caring about consequences. She had 2 minutes left to live. The next 120 seconds exposed the darkest reality of human nature, the capability for overkill. At 10:48 p.m., the line between a domestic dispute and a massacre was crossed. Thompson didn't just attack Mackenzie. He unleashed a torrent of rage that forensic experts rarely see outside of wartime atrocities. It wasn't a fight. It was an execution. In the span of 2 minutes, Tyrone Thompson stabbed Mackenzie Anderson 78 times. He used 2 kitchen knives. The violence was so frenzied, so forceful, that one of the blades snapped in half, the handle breaking off as it struck her chest. Neighbors heard the sounds of the struggle, the sickening thud of violence that echoed through the complex. One witness, peering through a gap in the locked door, saw a scene from hell. Thompson standing over the defenseless young mother, plunging the knife into her repeatedly, completely silent. No screaming, no shouting, just the mechanical, rhythmic destruction of a life. What drives a human being to stab someone 78 times? This goes beyond murder. This is what criminologists call overkill. It signifies a deep, personal hatred, a desire to not just kill the victim, but to obliterate them, to punish them for existing. Mackenzie fought. Her defensive wounds tell the story of a woman who clawed for survival until the very last second, fighting for herself and for the 1-year-old son who was in that apartment, covered in his mother's blood, witnessing the monster who claimed to love her destroy his world. We often hear about these tragedies and think they are rare, but the system failed Mackenzie 8 times before this moment. We need to make sure her story isn't just another statistic. I want you to pause the video right now and comment the phrase "justice for Max" below. Let's flood the comments to show that we remember her name, not just the monster who took her. Do it for Mackenzie. Do it for her son. When the blue lights finally swept across Krebert Street, cutting through the darkness, it was no longer a rescue mission. It was a recovery operation. Officers rushed the scene, weapons drawn, adrenaline pumping, prepared for a confrontation. But what they found was a tableau of horror that would require counseling for even the toughest veterans of the force. Mackenzie was found lying outside her unit. The physical evidence of the rage she endured was resting right on her chest, the broken handle of the knife, discarded like a used tool. But the horror didn't end with Mackenzie. In the middle of this slaughter, investigators found her 1-year-old son. He was physically unharmed, but he was covered in his mother's blood. He was the silent witness to a nightmare no child should ever see, a living testament to the collateral damage of domestic violence. Paramedics worked frantically, desperate to find a pulse, a breath, any sign of life. But the damage was catastrophic. Mackenzie Anderson was pronounced dead at the scene, exactly as she had predicted she would be. Tyrone Thompson was arrested immediately. He hadn't fled. He hadn't tried to hide. He was bleeding from a hand injury. a wound sustained not from defense, but from the sheer force he used to grip the knife while ending a life. When police handcuffed him, there was no breakdown. There was no realization of the enormity of his actions. Instead, the mask of the narcissist slammed back into place. During the interrogation, his words sent chills down the spines of the detectives. He didn't express regret. He didn't ask about the child. Instead, he tried to rewrite reality. He told officers, "She had a knife. I just stabbed her till she stopped." Those words, "till she stopped," reveal the chilling truth. He wasn't stopping a threat. He was stopping a heartbeat. He viewed her life as an inconvenience that needed to be extinguished. It was a cold, calculated admission of intent, delivered with the casual tone of a man. If the murder was the first assault on Mackenzie Anderson, the legal process became the second. For nearly 3 long years, Tyrone Thompson held Mackenzie's grieving family hostage within the justice system. Despite the overwhelming evidence, the DNA, the witnesses, the 911 call, and the sheer brutality of 78 stab wounds, Thompson looked the court in the eye and pleaded not guilty. His defense? He claimed he acted in self-defense. Let that sink in for a moment. Self-defense. A man who broke into his ex-girlfriend's home, armed himself with kitchen knives, and stabbed an unarmed woman nearly 80 times had the audacity to claim he was the victim. It was a final, cruel act of gaslighting. By maintaining this lie, he forced Mackenzie's mother, her friends, and her community to live in a state of suspended animation. They couldn't grieve. They had to prepare for a trial. They had to prepare to see the autopsy photos, to hear the 911 tape, to relive the worst night of their lives in a sterile courtroom while Thompson watched from the dock. This is a tactic we see time and time again with narcissistic killers. They use the court system to extend their control over the victims' families. But just 1 week before the trial was scheduled to begin, when the reality of facing a jury finally set in, Thompson's resolve crumbled. He didn't have a change of heart. He made a calculation. On the eve of the proceedings, he finally changed his plea to guilty. It wasn't an admission of remorse. It was a coward's exit to avoid the full scrutiny of a public trial. On May 2nd, 2025, the gavel finally fell. Justice Richard Weinstein sentenced Thompson to 22 years and 6 months in prison, with a non-parole period of just 15 years. To the family, and to the public watching in horror, the number felt like an insult. 15 years for a life. 15 years for erasing a mother and traumatizing a child forever? The courtroom didn't feel like a place of justice that day. The sentencing wasn't the end of the pain. It was the catalyst for a new wave of outrage. When the gavel fell on that 15-year non-parole period, a collective gasp went through the community. The Crown prosecutors saw what everyone else saw, a sentence that was manifestly inadequate for the sheer brutality of the crime. They launched an appeal, fighting to keep a dangerous man behind bars for longer, arguing that 78 stab wounds demanded a harsher penalty. But the legal system is a cold, bureaucratic machine that often operates on precedent rather than justice. In November 2025, the appeal was dismissed. The sentence stood. Mackenzie's mother, Tabitha Ackred, stood amidst the wreckage of these legal decisions and called it what it was, an insult to women globally. It felt like the system was saying that a young mother's life was worth less than 2 decades of a killer's time. But while the courts were failing the family in public, a private discovery revealed just how deeply the system had failed Mackenzie while she was alive. In the aftermath of her daughter's murder, Tabitha found a piece of correspondence that exposes the rot at the core of domestic violence support services. Remember, Mackenzie had begged for help. She had asked for security cameras. She had filed the paperwork. Weeks after she was butchered on her own doorstep, a response finally arrived from the very organization she had pleaded with for protection. It wasn't an apology. It wasn't an offer of support for her orphaned son. It was a sterile, automated notification stating that they were closing her request for support because you are now dead. It was the ultimate bureaucratic cruelty. The help she needed to stay alive arrived only to confirm that she was gone. It was a final indignity, a message that confirmed Mackenzie wasn't just killed by Tyrone Thompson. She was abandoned by the very safety nets that were supposed to catch her. In the face of absolute despair, Tabitha Ackert did something extraordinary. She refused to let her daughter become just another ghost story whispered about in the halls of justice. She took the rage that the system had ignited and turned it into a weapon for change. She launched a petition that didn't just ask for attention, it demanded a revolution. Over 30,000 people signed their names, a chorus of voices screaming that 15 years is not enough for a life taken in cold blood. And the walls of power finally shook. On November 18, 2025, the New South Wales Parliament passed historic legislation. For the first time in Australian history, a 25-year standard non-parole period was established for the murder of a current or former intimate partner. They call it a victory for justice, but we must remember the price tag attached to it. It cost Mackenzie Anderson her life. It cost a 1-year-old boy his mother. It cost a family their future. This law means the next monster might think twice, or at least stay locked away long enough to spare the next victim. But for Mackenzie, it came too late. Her story stands as a brutal, permanent warning to us all. We watched the red flags, the isolation, the control, the strangulation, the threats. We watched the system fail 8 times. And we watched a vibrant young woman predict her own murder while the world moved on. Evil doesn't always look like a movie villain. Sometimes it looks like a charming 22-year-old with a troubled past. Sometimes it looks like a conditional bail release paper. And sometimes it looks like a closed case file sent to a dead woman. Mackenzie Anderson fought to the very end. Now, it is up to us to keep her fight alive. Look out for your friends. Listen when they say they are afraid. Because sometimes, the difference between life and death is simply someone refusing to look away.